Welcome to Accelerating Offshore Wind and Nature Protection in Denmark. This is a webinar organized by the Renewables Grid Initiative and the Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature. My name is Cristina Signoli. I'm the director of the Offshore Energy and Nature portfolio at the Renewables Grid Initiative. And this webinar is organized in the context of the activities of the Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature. Now, as you can see here, the Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature in the Baltic and in the North Sea has been established in 2020 and today gathers almost 40 organizations. These are NGOs, are representative of the wind industry and the transmission system operators, along with the support of other organizations working towards similar objectives. Our objective is the one of finding solutions to accelerate offshore wind and also enable the needed electricity grids. At the same time, to make sure that this happens hand in hand with marine protection and restoration. This webinar is the second of a series that we started this year in the spirit of enabling exchanges among experiences and implementation at the member state level. We started this year with the Netherlands, where we had a discussion on where we were at and what is the regulatory framework for both offshore development, protection and restoration. And we also produced a fact sheet so that you can find all this information on our website. Now, without further ado, a couple of rules, so we should be all aware of those, but it's always good to be reminded. Please mute yourself, and also very important, rename yourself with name or organization. This will be very important for the Q&A session. If you have questions, please write the questions in the chat and also address them to one of the speaker or to all in case. And also this webinar is recorded and it will be published on the RGI YouTube channel. Now, last but not least, we have a survey that you will find in the chat where you can actually let us know who you are. So what is the country where you come from and actually what specific field do you cover? So please fill this in because it's very important and precious information for us. Now, today we dive into Denmark. So we start with understanding where we are at with the capacity, understanding how the planning of offshore wind and protection and restoration is working. And we will start the presentation with the input from the Danish Energy Agency and Tobias Grinstedt. Tobias is the environmental team lead of the Offshore Wind Office. So, Tobias, I pass the floor to you. We start with this introduction and overview. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Please.
Great. And thank you for the opportunity to come and give this presentation. I will do it rather quickly, but of course, I hope you have questions afterwards, and hopefully I will be able to answer them. Next slide, please. I just want to give a brief introduction to the Danish one-stop shop concept, because that's really at the heart of how we plan and permit the offshore wind projects in Denmark. And as you see here, the Danish Energy Agency acts as sort of a central coordinating authority between all the other authorities that have interests in the sea, either because they have other spatial interests or because they are somehow related or involved in our projects. For example, the Danish Maritime Authority will need to approve navigational risk assessments as part of our projects. We also have a very focused, you might say, hierarchy, where we have political decisions behind the energy agreements mandating these offshore wind farms. So there's a very clear mandate from the political level all the way down through the Danish Energy Agency, you might say, to the project team at the end. So we have a very flexible dialogue also with our developers. which we think they appreciate, and we're able to effectively handle a lot of questions and a lot of topics on a project level, which we think is quite effective. Next slide, please. This is just an overview, so you might get an idea where the DEA is involved. This illustrates the tender process all the way from selecting the sites at the left of the screen all the way to decommissioning. And this really shows that the Danish Energy Agency is involving other authorities along the way, both when we do the site selection, when we do the strategic environmental assessments, when we get to the permitting parts of the project, and also when we get to the operation of the project. The DEA is at the core and are coordinating the effort with other authorities and act as a facilitator between other authorities that are involved and the project developer. So this is just a brief overview of how our one-stop shop operates. Now I just want to briefly mention the current status of the offshore wind in Denmark. We are currently tendering 6 gigawatts. Those are the orange areas on the map. And the projects in the North Sea have a bid deadline in December 2024. And the other projects in the inner Danish waters and the Baltic Sea have a deadline in April 2025. This is the current tender, and we have a minimum of 6 gigawatts because there's a possibility for overplanting in these tenders. So it might be significantly more. Also a brief update on the open door scheme that has been closed in Denmark. There was a political decision last year, at the end of last year, followed up by a change to the Danish Renewable Energies Act that has closed for further open door applications. So the only way to construct offshore wind farms going forward in Denmark is through the government tenders. Next slide, please. And these are some of the elements that are incorporated into our 6 gigawatt tenders. We don't have any competitive criteria for the tenders, but we have some minimum requirements that includes nature inclusive design for 2 wind farms, one in the North Sea and one in the inner Danish waters in Kattegat, which aim to provide some positive effects on local marine pressures. And we are going forward with this. They have free hands on deciding which measures they want to incorporate into their projects. We have provided a catalog describing what are the environmental pressure factors. So they will need to come up with solutions that counter those negative pressures on the marine environment. That's how we are going forward with this. We also have requirements for environmental impact monitoring, where we're currently developing an impact monitoring program and developing guidelines for this impact monitoring program. So going forward, there will be very effective, we think, monitoring of the impact from offshore wind farm for the new wind farms in Denmark. And all data and results will be made public. That is one of our key goals with this. This is also to make the data accessible to everyone and make sure it can be used by other authorities, the public, and research institutions, and internationally as well. We also have some sustainability requirements for life cycle assessments for the projects and requirements for recyclability of the turbine blades, which needs to be documented. Next slide. Yes. Lastly, this is an assignment we're currently doing, a very large assignment we're doing at the Danish Energy Agency, where we're conducting a sensitivity mapping and an assessment of the offshore wind potential based on environmental factors. It's a task that are subdivided into 4 tasks. It's being done by the Danish consultant NIRAS, along with 2 universities, Aarhus University and Danish Technical University, as project partners. And this is really to get a much better idea on what are the pressure factors we're facing in the marine environment. How vulnerable is the marine environment to this offshore wind development? And what are the cumulative impacts we are looking into? So one of the parts of the assignment is a sensitivity mapping on a wide range of environmental parameters. After that, we have an assessment of what is actually based on that sensitivity mapping, based on a large geological survey of the entire seabed. What are the potential for offshore wind? And the third assignment is screening for cumulative impacts. What cumulative impacts do we expect on the marine environment going forward, and not only taking into account the Danish large-scale offshore wind development, but also the wind development in other countries. And last but not least, we have the assessment of barriers and potential for coexistence, which sort of sums up and says, based on the sensitivity, based on the assessment of the offshore wind potential and the cumulative impacts, what are some of the challenges and possible solutions going forward to better integrate environment and offshore wind? I think that was pretty much within the allocated time. So thank you very much. And of course, I can hopefully answer any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Tobias, for being up to the challenge of describing in a few minutes the overall regulatory context. Of course, there is even more to say. Okay, so for the participants, so start asking your questions. We will do all the presentations together, and then we will open up to a round of discussions, because some of your questions might be also answered in the next presentation. Therefore, I would like to now introduce the input from the Green Power Denmark, and with us there is Nina Rask-Scott, consultant at Green Power Denmark, and Nina will tell us about a Danish Marine Conservation Fund. So Nina, tell us how this is actually relevant to the what we are discussing here today, how to make offshore wind nature friendly. Nina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for getting this opportunity to speak a bit about how offshore wind in Denmark can also enhance biodiversity offshore. I'm going to speak a bit about the Danish Marine Conservation Fund. So please, next slide. And yeah, I forgot to mention, I'm from Green Power Denmark, so I'm representing the energy sector as an association. And I just want to quickly comment on what Tobias said, that basically with this tender, the 6 gigawatt tender, we have some minimum requirements for the first time in regard to sustainability. And on the other hand, we also have these nature inclusive design parks, like Tobias mentioned. So that means that for the first time ever, a Danish tender is actually looking to marine biodiversity and enhancement within the tender like this. So besides having those two components, we also have this Marine Conservation Fund. And just to be clear of how marine conservation is related to offshore wind, it's because there was this political agreement. So the fund was coined already in 2023, and in regard to the tender frameworks for the 6 gigawatt offshore wind. So like I said before, we had those two components, but the tender itself is a price-only tender. That means that you're not competing on how to be the best at doing any nature inclusive designs or anything. It's a price only, and then afterwards you're gonna try to make a positive impact on nature. So we coined this fund where you could start looking at how to enhance and how to create nature restoration at sea, but also coexistence. So as you can see on my slide, there are like two purpose two-sided purpose in this fund. So the first one and the biggest part of this fund is marine nature restoration. And then secondly, we have the coexistence between offshore wind and nature. So when I say those two purposes for marine conservation, we mean like building up nature again. So because it's pretty ruined at the moment. And the second one is about how to become smarter, how to know more about coexistence between offshore wind and nature. So we had this political agreement, and in Denmark we have a political culture where we speak with each other. So basically we had this we have those like free organizations, so Green Power Denmark and Ocean Institute, which Mathilde represents today, and the Danish Conservation Agency, so Danmarks Naturfredningsforening. Yeah, and basically all of us three organizations, we are different, we have different interests, but we knew that if we could land some kind of deal of how we would like to see this fund construction and present it to the politicians, then maybe we could try to influence how this fund could both enhance coexistence in regard to offshore wind and also nature restoration. So we started bridging our ideas, and actually it went really well. We had a lot of difficulties agreeing on how this fund should be, but in the end, it was a finished package that we could serve to the politicians and say, okay, if you do this, then you have the biggest actors in regard to the seabed who really would like to see it this way. So we got it, and next slide. So we agreed on some of the basics for the fund, which is first of all, we had 500 million kroner, so that's approximately 700, not 700, oh, I wish that was the case, 70 million euros, and it's funded by the state until 2030. And then we had written into the agreement of the fund that it needs to be revisited in regard to financing in 2028. And just to, it's not going to be like a private fund. So the governance-wise, we see that it's going to be anchored within the Ministry of Environment. So not the DEA, which Tobias is representing, but the environment. And it's going to be having a secretariat within the Danish Environmental Protection Agency. So it's going to be very state regulated. And also the fund is going to be written into law. So that's a really good thing as well. So the last bullet is like what we wish for. So it's not part of the political agreement at the moment, but we really wish for a financial flow from multiple stakeholders, which have an effect on the marine environment. So like I just said before, we have the 500 million krona, and it's only until 2030. And then we would like to see that everybody who have an effect on the ocean, they would kind of participate and contribute into this fund, so we could really make some big projects. Next slide, please. I promise this is my last slide, so you don't have to listen to me anymore. But just for the content of this fund, when you look at what kind of projects can it actually do, it can be divided into like 3 pillars. So we have one pillar which goes to data, and then we have nature restoration, like that talked about earlier, and then we have coexistence between nature and offshore wind. And as you can see, I just put on some numbers here. So they chose to prioritize the finances of the fund. So you have most of the finances going to nature restoration and coexistence, 60 million euros. And then we have the 10 million euros to data. And I'm not going to say a lot more about data and nature restoration. Mathilde is going to do that. But I just want to say really quickly in regard to coexistence, because coexistence between offshore wind and nature and nature enhancement is a new field, and we're all trying to grab exactly how to do it and what to do and how can we make it cheap, how can we make it smart. So the purpose of this fund in regard to coexistence should be to test specific methods and trials and contribute to this like new knowledge about how to enhance nature around offshore wind, and the possibilities for coexistence. Yeah, I think that's my bit.
Thank you very much, Nina. So this is a very good example. We can discuss then later a bit on the details, but it's a very good examples of how, yes, offshore wind and renewables can be actually combined with other targets that we need to reach when it comes also to targets at sea. So that for how member states actually implement those. So we will come back to you as well. So we will just postpone a bit the discussion. Now we go actually to the next input, and the next input is from the Ocean Institute. We have with us Mathilde Mammen, the chief economist. So Mathilde, welcome. Mathilde, so you're going to dive, but also go beyond what Nina just presented. So what's your perspective on nature-friendly offshore developments and how this is regulated and set in Denmark?
Yes, could you please turn on the next slide?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, as you said, Christina, thank you for the invitation. But as you said, I'm going to elaborate a bit on what Nina said. But yeah, as you also introduced, Nina, that it was a really good work together with the Green Power Denmark and the Danish Society for Nature Conservation, where we had a lot of good talks and tried to figure out how to get a common ground. But I would also like to start with the fact that Danish seas are under tremendous pressure. So we definitely need some knowledge on how to restore and actually just how to do it in practice. So to begin with the project, or with the political agreement, two concrete projects were decided, the one called the Torbæk Rev, and a screening for a potential new project in Storebælt in Denmark. We also have a lot of new projects to come, and this is going to be arranged in that way that each year the secretariat for the fund is going to get a lot of input from an advisory board that knows a lot about how to restore the oceans and how to do how to do the mapping, how to do the restoration. They're going to put some input into the secretariat, which hopefully will lead to a lot of new great projects that's going to be carried out in the upcoming years. So next slide, Christina, please. Thank you. So next I would like to talk a bit about the data side of this fund, because the data side is divided into, to make it easy, two pieces. At first, the fund is going to make a common data platform and infrastructure. So today it's the fact that often data is scattered, and we also see in some cases that the data is lost. It's all the advisories that's collecting the data, and afterwards it's not going to be used together for the data sets, and it's not publicly available for everyone in Denmark. And furthermore, there are some governmental monitoring on the side, but the data sets for the seas are not collected, so it's a bit difficult to get the full picture on the data side. And to get a full picture for the database and scopes and such. So therefore, there's a really huge task on like how to collect the data and how to get a common land-based data or an ocean-based data platform. We also, when we tried to figure out how to do this and like how to explore if it was possible to make a common Danish database, we also looked a lot to what has actually been done on land in Denmark, where we have this amazing database called the Data for Deadline, which collects a lot of data sets on land and tries to put them into the same framework. So we actually would love to see a similar platform for the seas. We also know that it's going to be really costful, so this is a really good start that the politicians has contributed to the data for data in the fund, but we also think that there's going to be a need for more money into to actually get the platform going. So, and furthermore, the data part of the platform of the fund is also containing a tool for assessment of the cumulative effects. So it's still rather new, and we still need to see how is this tool actually going to be carried out. But some of our main focus of this this tool is to how to incorporate all pressures and how to use the data that we actually got today, and to see, all right, how can we use the data that we got today, and how can we add some more data as we get more knowledge on the facts and on different other ecosystem components. So I think that was what I would like to say. Finally, I could say that as Nina said in the end, we would also love to see more data from other activities at sea as well. And that would be really good for both the database in general, but especially for the tool for assessment of the cumulative effects. Thank you for the floor.
Thank you very much, Matilde, for the complimentary and also great overview on a key topic, which is data. So the data that actually allow us to understand whether the effects are positive or negative, and therefore are very much needed in order to base all of our discussion on science. So thanks a lot. Okay, so we are now enter. So thanks a lot to all the speakers for the input. I already took notes and already have some questions. I will actually stop sharing the screen now because we start with a round of questions for our speakers. So I will break the ice so that I will go with the first round of questions. And I took notes, and let's start from you, Tobias. So let's start in the order of actually the speakers. So Tobias, you show us a process that actually is one of the processes that the Commission as member states to implement, the one of the one-stop shop. We are talking about the integration of policies, of targets, and this requires ministries collaborating, and we know different departments within ministries, so that we know how this already accelerate overall the deployment of offshore wind. Now, my question is, there is also at the moment talks about accelerating also through the identification of acceleration areas. So I was wondering, from your perspective, how is Denmark implementing this acceleration, and are further actions needed in order to ensure that this acceleration actually allow us to meet the targets that we have ahead of us?
Yes, I'm afraid I have to be a bit boring on that question, because there hasn't been a political decision in Denmark yet whether to deploy or employ acceleration areas for offshore wind. So I can't really go into how Denmark will handle this issue.
Absolutely. So that's so this is one of the options. As I said, that the one-stop shop actually is already one of the action. So that are there further initiatives that will be undertaken when it comes to acceleration at the moment, or they are not foreseen because the system at the moment is working well with the auctioning and the capacity that has been allocated through the tenders?
Well, I think, well, in general, we think that the Danish system works quite well. We have had this one-stop shop concept for quite some time, and has developed it over the years. And I think Denmark is generally in the top when we talk about the effectiveness of our permitting procedures, and how quickly we can deliver an offshore wind project from we do a tender to the offshore wind farm is completed. And of course, the effectiveness of the permitting process is is important here, obviously. But what's also important to realize is that offshore wind projects are huge. They cost several billion euros to make, and they take a long time to plan as well. So when we have the permitting procedure in parallel with the project development, after we enter into a concession agreement with the winners of a tender, we start our permitting process, and parallel to that, the developers will of course have to design their offshore wind farms. They have of course done some of it already, but they will need to make additional preliminary investigations. They will need to enter into contracts with the sub-suppliers and everything. So there's a lot of parallel processes going on. And we think for our part, how we do it as a one-stop shop in Denmark, it's not a one-stop shop in that the Danish Energy Agency is the only authority involved, but it's a one-stop shop in the concept that the Danish Energy Agency supplies the major permits and has also the requirements for a range of other permits listed within our permits. So it's very clear that you will need to, as a developer, contact the Danish Maritime Authority to get approval of your navigational marking plan or navigational safety. That's all stated within our permit. And then, of course, that we facilitate the dialogue and act as a sort of building a bridge between the developer and the other authorities that might not be as used to talking to offshore wind developers. So that's really some of the key aspects in having an effective permitting process, we think.
Yes, and actually, for those who are interested in our previous webinar series where we look at the Netherlands, also we find out that there are many different ways of actually implementing acceleration, including then the auctioning, identification of areas, and then strategic environmental assessments. So that therefore, I think that we are going towards a direction that there are many different options contributing to acceleration overall. I saw, Nina, you raise your hand. Did you want to complement to Tobias' point? You're mute.
I'm muted, sorry. Yeah, I completely agree with Tobias on the one-stop shop, that we have a really good system in Denmark. I just wanted to add that as from the industry's point of view, it's a really good system, but it could use a bit more quality, like the DEA leaning even more into the role as a project leader. So because as Tobias mentioned, there's so many different ministries and authorities that have to be part of any project. So, and you know, we are lacking competencies and people who know these things already, but it really is it's a good start, but we would love to be even more efficient, of course. But I know Tobias is working hard, so yeah.
Thank you, Nina. And now just to close, because I see that there are other questions in the chat. And Matilde, when it comes to acceleration, so we're talking about data in order to make science-based decisions, and we know that it takes time. How can we actually combine the concept of acceleration, the need of having data, and how we can combine both?
So I think that better data is a necessity for actually doing the acceleration. Otherwise, we don't know where the seas can actually has a bearing capacity to actually to be capable of maintaining offshore wind farms. So it's definitely a need that we have to get established as fast as possible.
Okay, and this is also, it's an important message because we see so we launched the survey earlier and we see that there are participants from other member states where actually there is no offshore wind capacity. So it's very important to set the way we collect data from the very beginning in order then to make sure that the development is as nature-friendly as possible. Okay, now let's see, there are a few questions coming from the audience. So first of all, I see, how do we combine, because so we talk about enhancement, we talk about restoration. the question is, how do we combine the nature restoration law with actually the offshore wind developments? So it's part of the Marine Conservation Fund actually to find solution for both. But do you have any suggestions for relevant industries to prepare for the anticipated compliance? So maybe from an industry perspective, we can ask Nina. So is there already a way for developers that they can prepare themselves in order to know, although I have to say here that member states will have 2 years in order to come up with the restoration plans, so therefore this is not set in stone, but let's get an opinion.
Yes, thanks. That's a really good question. I think I would like to start by saying when it comes to marine restoration and these laws, offshore wind is not the prime, like motor in order to like make our oceans really, like the environment really bad. I mean, first of all, we have agriculture, we have fishing, we have a lot of historical elements that have provided a really bad state of nature in the Danish waters. So saying that, then the next level could be, okay, but then we have offshore wind. The DEA is designating sites which should be only for offshore wind and maybe nature enhancing methodologies on those sites. So only by taking out areas, sites that are historically have been used to fish or other economic activities at sea which have a negative impact, already by that threshold we have a positive effect on the marine environment. And then if you look at the nature restoration law, I would say that there are measures to enhance nature within those parks, but at the same time we really have to be careful of where do we place these different efforts. So a lot of media and so on, they talk about we can put out a lot of stone reefs around and then we're going to attract fish and all of these things, and that's also a really, really positive tendency, but it really depends on where we do those things. So when you look at nature restoration, you have to look at what are the sensitive places, like Tobias mentioned with the sensitivity mapping that they're doing in the DAA, and like Mathilde said about the data, what do we know, where should we really make an extra effort? And then we should look at like, okay, but what can offshore wind do in addition to those things, I would say.
Thank you, Nina. So this is, absolutely a key element also because a transition towards sustainable practices is for all activities at sea. So that therefore there is, a newcomer, of course, not very much in the North Sea. In other sea basins as a newcomer offshore wind, but this is like an effort that has to come from all activities. Maybe Tobias, I would like to ask to you, as I said, maybe it's too early because planning of restoration is something coming up, but how do you see, then this additional layer in MSPs in the end, in maritime spatial planning of restoration being integrated then with offshore wind?
I think there's no, I think first of all, one of the key issues here is that we still need more information, knowledge, what goes on in the marine environment after we construct an offshore wind farm, both positive and negative impacts. As Nina said, the current state of the North Sea and also the Baltic Sea and the inner Danish waters are not caused by offshore wind. It's caused by something else. I think there's no doubt about it that if we need to develop and construct several thousand, 10,000, 15,000 turbines in the North Sea, for example, we will have an impact on the seabed habitats. But we can also see that within an offshore wind farm, you usually use up 0.1% or something like that of the seabed for the turbines and the scour protection, the foundations and the scour protection. So it's the direct impact of an offshore wind farm is very, very small compared to how extensive bottom trawling fishing is, for example. But there's no doubt that if we're in a soft seabed environment, the placing of hard substrate could have an adverse impact that we don't really know that much about yet. So this, and I think that there's something here we need to know more. We need to have more information. Actually, what goes on in our seabed, both short term and long term, within offshore wind farms, because there's no doubt there are some negative impacts, but we know there's also some positive impacts. So I can't really answer directly what will the consequences of the EU nature restoration law be, but it could be that it will require that we develop or work towards, for example, foundations and scour protection that will have a lesser impact on soft substrate seabed than we have now. But I mean, I think it's a bit too early to be very, very specific. The only thing I can say with certainty is that we need more knowledge.
That's absolutely something that we need to acknowledge. So, and when it comes to knowledge, and here I go back also a bit on the data. On the data aspects. So we're talking about different activities, so that we're talking effects that are very difficult actually to separate one from the others, right? So when it comes to an offshore wind farms, or when it comes to other activities, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to many other pressures and on the ecosystem. So cumulative impacts are very important in order to actually understand also, I mean, in the end, what is the carrying capacity of the sea? Because I mean, it's like all the impacts together. When it comes to cumulative impacts and methodologies, what do you think? Where are we at the moment? What do you think are the steps that we should undertake now in order to work towards a more harmonized way of actually assessing the cumulative impacts? And I would also ask how feasible it is that we will understand specifically, I mean, the source of each impact. So should we have hoped to have such a clarity, or shouldn't we? So this is a bit for everyone. I would start maybe with Mathilde when it comes to cumulative impacts, but then this is of course also for Tobias and Nina, of course.
Yes, I think we also have to realize that we're never going to have the perfect picture on how it is. There's always going to be some uncertainties or something that we could know more about. So, but this shouldn't be an excuse for not doing anything. So from my point of view, we should also take some cautiousness, trying to plan ahead, trying to figure out, all right, we know that there's probably going to be some problems in a specific aspect of the offshore development, and then might try as best as we can, but we also have to know that it's that process of learning together, and like how to assess those aspects that we don't know, that we only know that we don't know enough about today. And I think that's rather crucial, that we have to experiment and like try to collect as much knowledge as long as we go.
Absolutely, that's a crucial point. Are there any other inputs? I mean, cumulative impacts is a very complex topic as such, although also within OCEAN, it is the offshore coalition is identified as one of the key aspects, because of course we cannot just, as Nina also said earlier, just look at the offshore wind farm, but we have to look actually at the broader ecosystems, and so that also the effects of other activities. So Tobias or Nina, other input on how we can progress on this? I go with Nina first and then Tobias.
Mine is just a really, really quick note,
yes,
which is like, when it comes to, of course, there's going to be some kind of cumulative impacts. Of course, we're not going to know everything before we start the build up. But I'm like, what is the alternative? What is the alternative if we don't start before we know everything? We have to start it, and then we have to learn along the way, and of course try to cooperate about data sharing and so on. That's just a small comment.
Thanks, Nina. Tobias, to you. As I mean, this is also among the things that of course you do. So
yeah, I think when you look at both the EU wind power package from autumn last year, and also what we do in the North Sea Energy Corporation, for example. We have a lot of focus on, we need something more sea basin level like. We need to be able to not just look at the environmental impacts and spatial planning within our own borders. And this is also when you look at the OCEaN declaration signed by 9 energy ministers. That's also, it's not just a declaration on reaching some very impressive renewable energy targets. It's also a commitment to look more into regional cooperation on the environmental level. It's specifically mentioned in the OCEaN declaration, along with the marine environment. So I think there's, it doesn't. We need to be able to find each other and have this discussion, whether it should be like sea basin-wide cumulative impact assessment going across all countries, or that we agree on certain methodologies to conduct environmental impact assessment, cumulative effects that we can do individually. I don't know. It's something we're working on both in the North Sea Energy Corporation and the very good GNSBI initiative that's also going on between the North Sea countries. One example could be that the sensitivity mapping and cumulative impact assessment we do, that I mentioned at the end of my presentation, the methodology for doing that assessment, that was also something one of the project leaders presented at the Velux conference in Copenhagen last week, is actually building on a methodology from the Wageningen Marine Research, but adding on top of that. And that's also a very important aspect, to use the same methodology or methodology that are similar, to be able to better compare results and use the results across borders. So I think it's a very important topic. I'm not just sure how what exactly is the best way to address it, but there's no doubt that we need some sort of international cooperation on this.
And so that when you mentioned, of course, the very important sea basin collaboration. This is actually key when it comes to methodologies to evaluate the effects. I mean, cumulative impacts for sure. You mentioned the ANZAC, the Greater North Sea Basin Initiative, and then, but which then organization would be more entitled actually to have also to make it, I would say, binding if possible, in order then for all to implement this? Is this possible, or is just going to be maybe a recommendation and hopefully it will be implemented by different member states in the same sea basin?
Well, I think I can't answer that, but of course that's something we're working on a government level. That is also to raise these issues, and I know that's also what you're working on a GNSBI perspective, to get you know, the ministers involved in this. But of course it's a work in progress. There's for the GNSBI, bringing together all the North Sea countries and all the different sectors within the North Sea countries, fishing, renewable energy, shipping. That's a very huge task.
Okay, that's a good answer. It's not for the other sea basins to get discouraged. So that's actually something that needs to happen as soon as possible in developments of offshore wind. There is energy cooperation at sea basin level usually, so that it's also important to have cooperation then from an environmental perspective. Okay, so now we addressed the effects of offshore wind, but then if we, Mathilde, you wanted to answer to this before we go.
Yes. I would just like to add that we should also keep in mind that we have the OSPA, and that they have a lot of competences in this area. So I would truly love to see some kind of governance also in between those two organizations, the GNSBI and the OSPA. I don't know exactly how they should do it, but maybe something about recommendations that could actually be implemented in OSPAR to make it sure that it's actually legally binding and so on, but that there's also some money coming with the recommendations.
That's OSPAR. It's definitely has a key role also with, of course, auto binding actually power. Okay, so it seems like that there is another question going into the effects of before I wanted to move actually to planning and optimization in planning, but let's stay just there one moment. So one of the participants, so from the University of Groningen, asked about, we touched upon it, about the uncertainties when it comes to what are the mechanisms to deal with uncertainties of potential impacts and risk of negative impacts, what are the potential of synergies, and if you can maybe refer to best or worst case scenario explored regarding enhancing versus degradation of the marine environment. So it's basically how do we, so we already heard in general that uncertainties will stay, but how practically do you deal with uncertainties? So I think, Tobias, this is first for you and then for all the others if they have an answer.
Well, I think, of course, there are uncertainties in our environmental impact assessments, but I will say we get better and better at doing environmental impact assessment because we get more and more data. I think what we're seeing now is that the uncertainties on an individual project level is, I would say, rather small. Because impacts from individual offshore wind farms have not been that great yet. But there are, I mean, some of the biggest uncertainties we see are on cumulative impact. So it's not something we can handle on the project level alone, because we can see if we scare off marine mammals during a construction period, well, if it's a construction period of 2 or 3 months and it's not an area of huge importance to the marine animals, we implement mitigation measures. I think there's relatively little uncertainty in that this will not have an adverse long-lasting impact. But when we see compared to construction phases of all the other projects, well, that might be an issue. So I think that's one of the reasons we're actually doing this sensitivity mapping and cumulative impact assessment that will be done by the end of 2025. We will address some of these uncertainties, also relating to what are actually the ecosystem impacts. What happened when we take out energy from the wind? How does that affect wave generation? How does the affect currents? How does the placing of the foundations in the water column, how does that affect currents? There's a lot of things we don't know yet on that level, but that's we're working on it with our sensitivity mapping and cumulative impact assessment. So hopefully in a year, a lot of the uncertainties that we see now, we've become a lot wiser in a year.
Okay, that's clear. So it goes back to the cumulative impacts and then the need, I mean, actually for collaboration on methodologies, based in cooperation that are key in order to progress on this. Mathilde.
Sorry to take the floor again. I was just like to add just one brief point that with regard to the Danish environmental assessments, we do generally miss taking other activities into account when assessing the cumulative effect. So we would hopefully see better assessments of the real cumulative effect in the future, as Tobias said, that's both with regard to other parks, but we would also like, for example, when we're building new bridges, if there's fishery in an area and so on.
Yes, that's absolutely key. Now, I see lots of questions in the chat, so that we will also try now to have the last few minutes in order to answer to many of those. But now, one of the questions is for sure related to the fact that through these webinars, we want also to inspire other member states. And so one of the questions that we received is actually about the Marine Conservation Fund, and is whether, in your opinion, you think that this could be replicable in other countries, and maybe what your recommendations would be. So what the process entails and how can member states look at this as an opportunity, and what should be the stakeholder engagement around it. So if there are specific recommendations that you would give to other member states. Who wants to break the ice on this, on replicability, scalability? Matilde, please.
Thank you. I think stakeholder involvement is crucial to know what makes sense. I also think that it would have some really nice potential if expanding this idea of a fund to other countries, because there's a lot of those areas where you do want to do restoration that doesn't know boundaries or national boundaries. So it would be nice to have this common way of assessing restoration and be able to make those large areas for the nature. So to make sure that it actually going to be a good community where you have spawning, you can have all those nice effects of biodiversity.
Thanks, Matilde. Any other suggestions from your side? Nina?
I just want to also say that stakeholder engagement is crucial. Secondly, I actually want to mention the Netherlands, because the Netherlands have a even larger sum of finances for a similar fund, but that funding goes for like all activities at sea. So they also have the fisheries included in how to transition them into a more sustainable fishery experience. And as part of that big funding, they have a smaller program directly pointed at nature enhancement, such as coexistence and nature restoration and all of these things within offshore nature. So I would say, for if I was a country who had to make a new marine conservation fund, I would maybe try to bridge, like, what did they do in the Netherlands and how did they do it in Denmark? Could there be any way of cross-border interaction, and also really trying to make it possible to see these multiple stakeholders at sea all having to finance this fund. So it wouldn't only be state, but it could also be something that in the future you would know that it has like a sustainable flow of finances into this fund.
That's actually points us at our two webinars, because the previous one was on the Netherlands. So please look at that, because we also touched upon this and this today. But then we will also be following the developments of the Marine Conservation Fund in order then to inform also other stakeholders on how the process is going, and we'll work then on 2030 onwards. Now we have a few minutes left, so that I see that some of you are replying to the participants directly in the chat, so please do so. Maybe just to ask, so at the very end, so we have talked about acceleration, we have talked about integration. Now, how we can embrace this integrated planning even more in the future? So are there trade-off? So integrating this planning of energy and nature, I mean, does this require trade-off? I would say just a quick round of all of you. So how we can better do that? Are there trade-offs that should be considered? Who wants to go first? I would say, Tobias, you go first.
Yes, that's a good question. I think one of the trade-offs that, but of course this it's a bit unclear yet, but I think a lot of people expect that we can't uphold the same pressure from other activities on the marine environment if we want to do this large-scale offshore wind development. I'm not sure. I mean, it's there's a lot of different results out there and a lot of scientific work being done, but I think that's where many see this going, that there will be trade-offs on the impact of the marine environment. We can't continue, I think we foresee that there will be significant risks related to the offshore wind development at that scale if we can't decrease other pressures on the marine environment. And that's of course also where nature inclusive design and other aspects, nature enhancement, nature restoration will be very important, also in relation to offshore wind projects.
So we need to decrease pressure. If we include something, we will need, to make something else either more sustainable or remove it. Thanks a lot. Nina, to you. You're on mute.
Yes, I'm not muted anymore. Okay, so basically, when talking about integration of nature inclusive design and the trade-offs, I would say it costs maybe a lot to do these things, and how to efficiently and economically make it better for developers to do these things. Like, for instance, I know there's a lot of really good technologies on how to mitigate different negative effects of building an offshore wind park. But these techniques are not always being used in the scale that they could be, because it's too expensive. So from my point of view, I would love that nature inclusive design, nature enhancements, technology that make this easier, smarter, cheaper, put a lot of money into it, research done on it, so we can actually use it for the big scale build out.
Okay, so therefore the innovation and the need actually to reduce cost through a larger application and implementation. Thanks a lot, Nina. Matilde, to you, the floor.
Yes, as Nina said, I also think it like be done a lot of good things on site with nature inclusive design and so on, but I'm not sure we can get everything we want by going on that path. We also do need to protect some areas and to do some restoration offsite, definitely. And we need to think in scale, because nature actually do need large areas, which also leads back to Tobias's point that we probably need to do some trade-offs between activities in the end, because often you can't use an area twice. It's only in rare cases.
Thank you.
So we need
Exploring multi-use and others, but also coming to terms that there will be then some negotiation to be done. Thanks a lot. So we exceeded the 2 minutes now, the time. And so I would like to thank the three of you very much for the inputs. And I see that there is still some discussion going on in the chat. We will make sure then to follow up on those. By the way, please subscribe to the OCEaN newsletter in order to stay informed on the activities. We have an upcoming conference on the 30th of October in Brussels that will be actually based on nature positive and people positive offshore wind developments, but also many other activities coming up. So I would like to thank you all, and thank you very much for the very meaningful discussion, and stay tuned then for the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.